Good evening, everyone. Welcome back. I'm very excited for our next guest. He is a longtime Jewish educator involved in summer camps, involved in as a youth director, as a religious school teacher, but that is not his full-time job. By day, he is actually a middle school science teacher. And something else very special, my brother, Marshall Sachs. Marshall, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, hi, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
I'm excited. Part of this show is not just, even though the subject's learning with my rabbis, learning with people that have helped impact me. We just had another special non-rabbinic guest. So it's great to welcome another non-rabbinic guest that has helped shape who I am myself as an educator, because I've always looked towards you and your creativity and enthusiasm at camp as kind of a model for my own programs. So I'm really excited to have you. I remember back even actually in university and undergrad, when I was a youth director, often calling you for advice, as you had much more experience in that field. So it's great to have you with us. I wanted to just jump in a little bit, because science has always been a very important part of your life. You went to UC Berkeley, you majored in I think genetics, genomics, some other words that I can't really pronounce or understand. And then you graduated with a great degree from Berkeley, and you went to work at a synagogue, which is not, I think, the typical choice of most majors in that area. So what brought you to that?
That's a good question. So I had an idea that I knew I was interested in science from a young age. So that's part of it. I had an idea that I might want to be a teacher after having a particularly inspiring science teacher in 8th grade. But I didn't know. I was also considering things like medicine and things like that. So the question is, what brought me to working at a synagogue after graduating? Well, I grew up, like Lewis said, going to summer camp. I went to Camp J.C. Shalom in Malibu, where you just heard from Rabbi. And that was a huge part of my life. It still is today. I've gone back actually every summer since I was 11, except for this summer, in some different way. And for me, growing up, I think that that was one place where I just really felt like a stable community. Like I had friends in school and friends on the block and all of that. But there was something special about just coming together, and, you could be, it sounds cliche, but you could be like whoever you want. No one knew your background. No one knew anything else going on at home. It was just, you would come and you would see these people every year. And I think part of what really did make that special was that it was not only this powerful community, but, it was this first place where I felt like I really felt Jewish community. I grew up going to religious school. I actually really liked it. I probably didn't show it often as a kid. Thank you to all my teachers back then that put up with me and pushed me. And actually,
I don't think most religious school students show their appreciation when they're going through it, but I'm sure your teachers appreciate it now.
True. And actually, some of them stayed in contact with us for a while after. But anyway, I enjoyed that. I particularly like the learning Hebrew aspect. But it was at camp the first time when I really kind of felt like, I was part of this, like something bigger that was Jewish, whatever that means. I think part of it was our camp was a little bit interesting because it's not a movement camp. So we have people, with all kinds of different backgrounds, people practicing Judaism in ways that I had never seen before. But the thing that brought us together was having these conversations, was coming together, Shabbat at camp. If anyone's ever experienced it, I'm sure at any camp, it's just this amazing experience where people come together at our camp, like many dressed in white, singing together, where it doesn't matter if you're the youngest kid, or the camp director, you have parts actually, leading it and speaking and so things like that was, the ritual of that, I think, really brought us together. And it was also a place, really just, being out in nature, again, as somebody that, I already had a connection with science and knew that's what I wanted to go into. I mean, this place where you are basically outside every day, you know, looking at trees, looking at animals, exploring. You know, as a kid, that was memorable, and that really stuck with me. So all that, back to the question. And when I went to college, I was studying, like Lewis said, biology. But you know, I spent a lot of my time getting involved with the synagogue, Temple Sinai up in Oakland. At the end of my first year of college, I had a friend who was a religious school teacher there. And again, from camp, at this point, I'd been a counselor and all that, and I loved camp. I loved working with kids. I already had in the back of the idea that I might want to teach. And so I had a friend who offered me, hey, we have this tutoring job, this little part-time job at the synagogue in Oakland. I'd never been there before. Do you want to try it? I said, sure. So I did that for a year, just as a tutoring Hebrew, and things like that. And I was like, I really like this, and I want to teach her. So anyway, that was a big back and forth, but eventually I convinced them somehow that, 19-year-old me could be a full-time teacher. So thank you for having faith in me, Ophira. So I went, and I started teaching, and I just fell in love with it. I learned, I don't have a formal Jewish background, formal Jewish educational background. So, at first, what I knew was what I learned in religious school. So I think it actually forced me to, for my own growth, just to go out there and, learn more as I'm preparing lessons, and trying to make them, interesting and fun. So kids have this sense of Jewish identity that I kind of grew up with through camp. And so I think it actually forced me to grow a lot as a person. I wound up taking some Jewish studies and Hebrew classes in college because of it. It was kind of like, the push at first was to learn to teach, and then I'm like, well, I want to learn more for myself. So that was
It's interesting how those experiences kind of built on each other as they pushed you deeper and deeper. It started as part-time, then you were a teacher, and eventually you went to work full-time at the synagogue as the youth director after you graduated.
Yeah, it sounds cliche, but I really feel like even as a teacher now, even with all the work going in with the pandemic and all the craziness, I feel in some ways I'm lucky. Like I feel like I haven't had to, really work a day in my life, in the sense that I've always done stuff that, I've been really passionate about. A matter of fact, and still I started teaching in public schools. I don't think I ever had a job that was outside of the Jewish community. Until then, that was the first one. I grew up with Lewis. We taught in I just remembered this, a Madri program and like a Shabbat kind of family teaching program during, and throughout high school. So actually that was probably a big influence. That was a big influence too. Giving me experience.
I was just thinking about that as you're talking before about camp and the leadership roles. And even as a kid, you got to get up and lead things. I think it's an interesting model that was very successful at our childhood synagogue, with the teens getting us involved as educators for the younger kids. And at camp, it's interesting, that model of teaching as a way of learning almost, which I hadn't really thought much about before till you're talking about it now. But that was how they taught us at camp and at the synagogue, was they made us teachers.
Absolutely.
Similar to what you said just now in your own experience. You were a teacher, so you went out and you learned more so that you could teach more.
Yeah, that was true even back then. Honestly, looking back, I think that was probably a pivotal experience. I'm thinking growing up in the synagogue, like I said, I liked going to religious school. We went to many a Shabbat service, especially getting closer to bar mitzvah age and all of that. But the thing that really stuck with me, that kept me going back, I would go in for 2 or 3 days a week at least, out of the synagogue, for my own teen program that I was in, like as a student. For teaching for these, we did these Shabbatonim overnights, and then the Shabbat teaching. So I would be good 2, 3, 4 days a week sometimes. So that definitely, that was definitely my first real taste of, I think, doing real teaching and the power of that. But anyway, after college, back to this, nothing in life really was a plan, and I think I wound up really lucky because I got more and more involved throughout college, teaching, doing what I loved. Got involved with the youth group that they had there. And as soon as I graduated, at that point, I knew eventually I wanted to teach, and I wanted to teach public school because I wanted to do it full time and be able to kind of bring what I had to a wider audience. But as soon as I graduated, a job opening opened up in my synagogue to be the youth director, and I jumped, right at it. It was something I think, just being a part of it, I felt like I was a part of that community. It's something I wanted to do, but I thought it was going to be part time. I thought I was going to do it for 1 year, and then go back, finish my credential. I wound up staying for 4 years. It was absolutely an amazing time in my life. Getting to work with kids of all different ages, getting to know their families, and having fun. I got to plan any kind of a fun event I wanted to, and looking back at what Lewis was talking about at our synagogue. Actually, I modeled some of what we did. Some of the programs I started after that. We started a leadership program and Shabbaton program where teenagers were actually trained and became leaders. And I think some of them actually went into teaching and all kinds of things after. But yes, I kind of wanted to, it was cool to be in this position, this thing that benefited me for so long, to be able to kind of further it and like lead in my own community.
That's great.
What?
Oh, sorry. I was going to cut you off, but keep going. I
was going to say, this thing I was going to do for 1 year, I wound up doing for 4. And honestly, would probably be forever, except the California test I needed to get my credential that I took in college expires after 5 years. So that was kind of the push. Like, if I'm going to go into teaching, I have to.
To get you out. But even after that, you still work part-time at the synagogue and the religious school.
Since then I've been teaching in the religious school every year since.
So going back to your story a little bit, most young Jews in their 20s and 30s, typically, especially in the States, aren't so involved, right? The Pew survey shows just how such a high percentage identify as none, even though they were born Jewish when asked what their religion is. Let alone even a lot of those who identify as Jewish don't associate with synagogues and formal Jewish institutions. So what I'm curious in a way is, your background is very much informal Jewish education, same as mine, religious school, camp, all of these kinds of experiences. And also our little sister Chana, who's a doctor now, had similar experiences, and she is also, for our demographic, the three of us are fairly involved in the Jewish community to different levels, right? I don't want to brag, but I might get the award for most involved in the Jewish community, but they pay me to be involved, so it's not fair. But my question is, we see such, even in day schools, kids come out after parents spend $200,000 on their Jewish educations and they're getting it 24/7, or not 24/7, they're getting it at least every day in school for 12 years. Even there we see a high dropout rate. What is it about informal Jewish education that you think, I know it's anecdotal, but in your own life that's been so impactful in terms of shaping your own Jewish identity?
I think that, because it's, informal education and all that, it's almost like, it's a choice, but it's like, it's hard to explain, but it's like almost accidental. Like, I never planned my path. Like, if you would have asked me what I was doing as a kid or as a teenager, I had some ideas, but I didn't know. But I think it was, just the fact that you're kind of, one, that it's really fun. So, camp is obviously an example of something that you go to camp, at least at first, because you want to, because your friends are there, because it's fun, because they have horses and archery or whatever. But as you're there, you kind of pick up on, small things, and you see this kind of Jewish aspect. And at camp, you see it everywhere. Even something as simple as conversations. We have Israeli staff that come over and, they lead programs, but the powerful aspects there is when you have a question, or they just have an informal conversation. And you're learning stuff that wants to make you learn more. We're seeing, Hebrew that, all over the place, and things in Hebrew. And I remember learning that in school, but okay, now I actually want to know more. Just the way that these, Jewish values, or at least values that are important in our tradition, are kind of infused intentionally everywhere. So I think it's because you kind of pick stuff up almost for other reasons. But then it makes you want to learn more, especially when it creates opportunities for leadership. So, I mean, I probably learned, at least as a teenager, in that leadership program, more preparing for that. I mean, I remember like, oh, I'm going to lead these prayers, so I better like really learn how to sing them with the recording. I remember, oh, I'm going to teach about this parsha. Well, I better really learn about it and think about it and figure out, well, before I can share it with the kids, well, what does this actually mean to me? So I think that's just the kind of like the informalness of it makes it's at first almost secondary, right? It's not something like this is the path, you're being forced to do this. You kind of absorb things almost secondarily, but then with chances for leadership, I think it makes it much more intentional. That kind
I think
of.
it goes back again to your own story of as you got these leadership positions, it sucked you in deeper and deeper into the Jewish community. What about in terms of the secular education you do, the science education you do at school? Has your experience in Jewish education and summer camps and youth group, has that impacted you as a teacher? You think differently than other teachers that just went maybe a more traditional route without that kind of informal education experience?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, going back to camp, I think having that informal experience in general, I think that can be applied and should be applied to more formal education. Like my goal is, as much as possible. And I think science in particular has a lot of opportunities, really the hands-on nature of a lot of science. But to create those kind of experiences, like for students that are as fun, as memorable, as active as camp. But not only that, but like the idea of community. I mean, teachers talk about like the importance of community, like in a classroom. And while not an explicitly Jewish thing, we all want to feel we're part of meaningful communities. But seeing the power of that at camp, how before we started talking about the Torah portion or anything like that, like we were bonded as a group. Like we cared about each other. We trusted our counselors. Maybe that was silly looking back, but we did. And the same kind of thing there. So kind of like being able to build as much as possible, even in a formal setting, like this real sense of community. We're here for each other. We're here. We want to learn, and the learning is experiential. I mean, and that's honestly how science is done best anyway. Like, so there's kind of a good match there. Yeah. More questions?
That's great. I'm just thinking again, still, you mentioned earlier the idea of the leadership roles and things. And I'm just thinking my own experience as a teacher. Oftentimes I found similarly that when I had this kid that really was uninvolved or misbehaving during tefillah, during services, or during class, giving them a role, giving them some job to do, really switch their behavior from being the problem to being the leader in the group, being the one that's really doing it. And I'm wondering now, just out loud, what ways that maybe, and you don't have to answer the question, but as a Jewish community, we can be doing better about that, of instead of looking at people that are assimilated or uninvolved, or have different views when it comes to Israel or egalitarianism or other things than maybe the mainstream Jewish institutions, rather than excluding, what we can do to maybe bring them into the fold by getting them involved in different ways, by giving them roles, by opening that kind of dialogue. Because I think that's something that camp does so well, and youth groups and all of these places. They're a place that really, they're big tent. Nobody doesn't belong in there. It's very hard to be beyond the pale in those kind of environments.
Well, I think there's two things. I think one, and something that's I think really special about our Jewish community in the Bay Area and the East Bay is it's we grew up in Los Angeles where there's a very big Jewish population, and so there's a lot more kind of specialization. Like you go to this particular Reform synagogue or conservative or whatever. Here there's also a good Jewish population, but it's not quite the same size. So I noticed, at least from how I felt growing up, and now there's a lot more collaboration, I think, between different institutions, conservative, Reform, Orthodox. I remember going to a Tashlik service, and it was led by the whole community. We had rabbis from all three major synagogues in Oakland standing up there, leading parts together. And, there was something, I just remember thinking there was something really powerful about that. Now, of course, like do we all agree on the exact same way we practice Judaism or different issues? Of course not. But there are these moments and parts where people can come together to do something that is, just Jewish together. And I think dialogues, I was for a long time a part of a program we have called Bay Area Midrashah, which was at the time a partnership again between synagogues and Jewish institutions throughout the East Bay. And we had kids. We had kids, Reform, Orthodox, conservative from the whole gamut, like together in classes on retreats. And I mean, kids learned a lot. I mean, it was the first time for many of our kids that I think that they really saw, like, we as a community kept Shabbat in a traditional way, so we could support that part of the community while at the same time, there was dialogues. We had a class where we used to have rabbis and speakers from all kinds of different movements and Jewish organizations come together and actually not only present, but very frankly answer kids' questions. So I think just having that perspective sharing and saying that not only are we all people, but we're all, in the end, we're all Jews. And I'm proud to say I feel very comfortable walking in, I think because of that, to any Jewish institution. And that's something that I really value.
That's great. That's great that you have those skills and that level of comfort. I think that's a big issue for Jewish adults that want to come back in, want to be a part of the Jewish community maybe, but don't have the tools and the abilities to feel comfortable doing that. It can be very daunting walking into a synagogue that's using a different siddur than you're used to, or different melodies or different rituals. So it's great that you had those kinds of experience and helped provide them as well to another generation. The final question I like to ask all my guests, and I feel a little bad because I neglected our pre-interview prep because you're my brother, and I didn't prep you for it, but I like to ask everyone for a piece of Torah, some Jewish value, some Jewish idea, something that's really been kind of an impactful part of their life that they've carried with them in some meaningful way. So is there anything for you that jumps out to put you on the spot for a moment? Some Jewish teaching or value that you really just have held dear and has influenced you over the years?
Honestly, I've been thinking about it a lot lately. The kind of like quote that really kind of sticks with me, and I'm sure I'm not going to remember it word for word, but like the the whole idea of like it's not our job to like complete the work, but it's our job to not to desist from it, to do a part of it. And that's actually really been at the forefront of my mind a lot lately, just looking at, in our own community and around the world, everything that's going on, issues of social justice, issues of, COVID-19, disagreements in our own community about ways how to handle everything. I mean, it seems overwhelming, climate change. Right now, we're at a time when everything just seems overwhelming, and it's something that I'm struggling with. And yet, I think that kind of message, like it's not okay to, I'm not expected. None of us are expected to single-handedly solve everything, but it's our job to identify and do what we can do and keep pushing ourselves there. So that's
I love that. It was a great quote in the Hebrew.
In these times.
Lo alecha hamlacha ligmor velo alecha ligmor. I remember the song. Rabbi used to sing it to us in religious school when we were little kids, connecting this to our past video.
No, I mean, I think
absolutely, it's such an important lesson because things can be daunting and overwhelming, and it's very easy to say it's too much and to just step back. But to remember, we don't have to do everything, but we also can't just step back and do nothing. So I want to thank you, Marshall. It was such a pleasure to have you with us and to share you a little bit with my community, because again, over the years, you really have impacted, even though I've never told you. And I'm regretting it already a little bit sharing with you now, but you have very much impacted my own rabbinate and my own approach to Jewish education, and working with kids and youth. And I've always looked up to you in that way, but I'll deny it and delete this interview off the internet if you ever mention this again. So I want to thank you for joining us. I want to thank everybody for tuning in and watching and letting me share my brother and others with you. Back again next week. We have a great lineup of rabbis coming to us over the next few weeks. I'm very much looking forward. So stay tuned. Look at the Facebook page and the Beth Tikvah website for information about that. Have a wonderful rest of your night.
If you don't love your neighbor, if you gossip about him, if you never have mercy, if he gets into trouble and you don't try to help him,